To Afghanistan now, where the Taliban is seizing control of more and more territory. Militants have taken their 10th major city of Ghazni and are closing in on Kandahar in the south. Now concerns are growing that they could take the capital of Kabul, home to the U.S. Embassy and hundreds of American troops. Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell has the latest.
Overnight, video released by the Afghan government apparently showing airstrikes on Taliban positions in Kandahar, but their efforts aren't doing enough to slow them down. In a video released by the militants displaying what appears to be some of their growing arsenal, a helicopter left behind by retreating government forces, and a treasure trove of Humvees and heavy equipment at a former army base now under their command. The speed and ferocity of their takeover is bewildering. Gunfire echoes through many Afghan streets as terrified residents are forced to run for their lives. And the militants parade their victories. Here in the western city of Farah, Taliban fighters patrolling the streets. And in Polycumri in the north, a Taliban video showing their white flag hoisted high. They now control almost 2/3 of the country.
And Ian Pannell joins me live now for more on this. Ian, you have covered this war since its beginning, and you were back in Afghanistan earlier this year. So what do you make of this offensive and how quickly Taliban forces have taken these cities?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, I'm very surprised. There were predictions that Taliban would take over the country. I don't think anybody predicted that there would be this pace of momentum, this pace of change. I mean, bear in mind, US troops still haven't actually left the country. The US embassy is still there. You know, the troop withdrawal is still underway. And yet we're seeing the Taliban in just 1 week taking over 10 provincial capitals. There was a sense that, yes, it controlled the rural areas. That was much easier. But they didn't really have the strength or the capacity to take and hold major cities. Well, we've all been proven wrong. I think the question is, where does that end?
And it sounds as if it's not a question of if the Taliban will take Kabul, but when. So how long can the Afghan army hold them off? What's the worst case scenario here?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what it's starting to look like, right? That the momentum has an inevitability about it that it can't actually be stopped. Now, the truth is, actually, if you look at what's happened over the last 2 weeks, they first of all tried to attack 3 much larger cities, Kandahar in the south, Lashkargah, and in the west of the country, Herat. Now, there they were held off because special forces were deployed, commandos were deployed, and they have much better fighting capability. So they were able, together with local militias and local forces, able to keep the Taliban at bay. So I'm still not entirely convinced that they are going to necessarily take over Kabul. But I think unless they slow their rate of advance, then there is a danger that the Afghan military collapses and everyone will up sticks and leave the country.
Now, President Biden said just a month ago that the Afghan government had the capacity, the forces, and the equipment to prevent its collapse. So is that still the case? What would it take to stop the Taliban advancing at this point?
Yeah, I mean, President Biden and the administration keep saying this. I mean, yes, he said it a month ago, but they've said it repeatedly that on paper, at least, they have 300,000 people in uniform. They've had the training. They've had billions of US tax dollars poured into them. So, yes, on paper, they should be able to hold the Taliban at bay. But the facts on the ground speak for themselves that they haven't been able to. Now, there is some US aerial support, but that is limited, and also only has a limited capacity. I mean, it's hard to stop an insurgency like the Taliban from the air. So I think the only thing that can happen is a serious regrouping of Afghan forces, those forces who have retreated and surrendered parts of the country. They come back to Kabul. They have the strengthening power of the special operations forces and also the will of the people. A lot of people do not want to see the Taliban sweeping into their cities. That's why you see so many people out onto the road, now sleeping rough in parks in Kabul, especially women and girls. We're hearing stories about fathers of the house sending their daughters away to Kabul, away from the Taliban for safety, because there are stories about the Taliban taking child brides. So I think people will vote with their feet. People will leave if they can, but some will stand and fight. And I always thought that rather than a wholesale Taliban takeover, civil war was more inevitable. We'll have to wait and see. Unless something slows down the Taliban, given their pace of their advance over the last week, I think in a matter of weeks, we could be talking about the Taliban being at the gates of Kabul, perhaps earlier.
Now, President Biden has also said that there's no comparison between the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan and the end of the Vietnam War. But what do you think? Could this be President Biden's Saigon moment?
I mean, it was interesting when the announcement was made that a deal had been struck with the Taliban. There was one of our colleagues who has a lot of experience in the military and in the U.S. government, shared his thoughts, and it was basically two quotes. One was of President Nixon making the announcement of the deal with the North Vietnamese. This was a China brokered deal. And the next was the announcement of the Viet Cong breaking in, starting to attack Saigon airport. And it's starting to look similar in the sense that you have this unpredictable force that seems to have its own momentum, its own inevitability, and is unstoppable. Even though we've spent years and billions of dollars training the local forces, they should be able to hold them off, but in practice they're not able to. So in that sense, yes, there is some kind of comparison. Now, clearly, President Biden doesn't own the war in Afghanistan the way other presidents absolutely owned the war in Vietnam, the way that they doubled down, the level of casualty, the level of loss is very, very different. But I think there is a danger here that if we see the Taliban advance as rapidly as they have over the last week onto Kabul in the coming weeks, there is a risk there that you're going to see a sudden scramble, an emergency evacuation of Western embassies, including the U.S. embassies. There will be an unsightly scramble to the airport, and people will be looking at it and going, yeah, that is your Saigon moment. This was avoidable. You cut the wrong deal with the Taliban. There was a way of getting concessions out of them. An unconditional withdrawal was really seen as a white flag of retreat by many within the insurgent movement and was a green light for them to just press, advance, and move on Kabul. Diane?
Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell. Ian, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.